everybody, and welcome to 3D printing with Adobe Photoshop, presented by Studio 300 and the Fountaindale Public Library. My name's Monica, and I will be taking you through this really short class to show you a couple techniques that you can use to make simple 3D objects using Adobe Photoshop, which you have access to at Studio 300 in the library. So we're just going to go ahead and jump in and get started. The two techniques that I'm going to show you is how to extrude a shape and also how to extrude a shape on a radial path. Those sound really complicated, but they're just words to describe basically taking a flat picture and turning it into a 3D object. So to get started, we are just going to go ahead and open Adobe Photoshop down here. And Photoshop is primarily used as a 2D art tool, whether you're doing photography or you are doing drawing or graphic design, but it has some 3D features built in, but you can only make a 3D object in a 2D space. So what that means is we're going to make a new document the same way you would if you were working on a 2D piece of artwork. And I'm just going to click open this template for a regular letter size sheet, because your document acts like a sort of window into the 3D space. You'll see what I mean in just a second. And to start off with this first one, we are just going to create a shape using the text tool and the shape tool. So I'm going to click the text tool, click horizontal type, and choose a type that I find interesting. Let's go with something like this impact type. And I'm going to type 3D print and use Command T or the transform tool to scale it up. To a size I want. I'm going to use the move tool to move it back here. So this is our flat image right now. If I was to turn this into a 3D model or something that I wanted to 3D print, it would print a bunch of separate letters instead of being one object. So we're going to make a base for it by using the shape tool, which is this rectangle tool down here. If I just click on it and draw a thin rectangle at the bottom of the shape, it automatically fills in with the same color. So now that I have my two shapes, if I go to my layers panel over here, you can see that the rectangle is on one layer, the 3D text, the text is on a second layer. I want to fuse those layers together so that they become one object. So right now, I have two different layers. The first thing I have to do is rasterize my type so that instead of the computer reading it as a type layer, it reads it as an image layer. So I'm going to right click and hit rasterize type. Then I'm going to select both layers by clicking on the first one, holding down Shift, and clicking on the second one, and then right-clicking to merge layers. So now, if I use my move tool, this has become one shape, and so it's ready for us to extrude. And extruding, if you've ever done something like putting cookie dough through a cookie press or seeing a machine make pasta, what they're doing is extruding a shape. So this flat shape is going to be like our die or our sort of frame, and we are going to stretch it out in the third dimension so that it becomes a 3D shape. So to do that, it's real simple. you just go to the 3D menu up at the top of the Photoshop window, and then you click on New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. And now you can kind of see it's changed a little bit. There's some depth. If you want to rotate your object, you just hold down your left click button and you can move your object around so that you can see it. If you want to go back to its original state, you just hold down Command and hit Z, and it will take you back to the original. So maybe you don't want your 3D print to be quite this wide. What you can do is, once you create a 3D object, this has converted in Photoshop from a 2D workspace to a 3D workspace, and you can adjust the extrusion depth. It'll tell you right now it's at about 2.5 inches. If I play with this slider, it makes a thicker or thinner 3D print. I like how that looks about there. And I'm just going to rotate this back. So now I'm ready to print this. If I go to, let's see, the 3D menu again, I can adjust the 3D print settings for my printer. I don't have a printer connected to this computer. I just want to export the file for right now. So it opens up a different properties window in the 3D window. All you really have to worry about is making sure that you set your print to local, which will put the file on your computer, and then setting it to an STL file, which is a pretty universal 3D print file. And then if I want to export my print, I go back to the 3D print menu, click the 3D print button, and it will start processing my image, processing my 3D model, until I have something like this. You can see what it kind of looks like by clicking and holding before you finally export everything, but I think that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is hit export down here, and I'm going to choose to save it as 3D print text and have it saved to the desktop. So from here, if I move this window out of the way, there is my 3D print, and you can open this up in any sort of printing slicing software like Cura. So I'm going to drag it open just so you can see. If I click and drag it to my Cura icon, there is my 3D model inside of the print bed. So from here, I would be able to send it to a printer down in the studio, or send it online if you have a different printer that you like to use, and 3D print this model. You can scale it up and down inside the slicing software, which I'm gonna do right now actually, because I don't want it quite that big. Let's try 50%. And now it is all good and ready to slice and print. The second technique that I'm gonna show you is how to do something with radial objects, how to create a little print object from like a radial slice. This works with anything that has radial symmetry. I'm gonna be making one out of a chess piece, but you can pretty much use it for anything that's round, like, or cylindrical, like a cup or something like that. So to get started, we're going to create a new document. I'm going to do another letter size document. And you need an image of something that you want to create. So like I said, I want to build a little chess piece. This is a common example when showing how to use Photoshop for 3D printing. that I think gets the point across real well. So I'm going to search on Google for a picture of a chess piece. And I'm looking for a picture of a pawn. Something like this would be good, something where you see a side view of the piece. You don't really want something that is like this, where it's angled, or a top view of the chess piece. But we are going to go ahead and go with this one right here. I'm going to copy this image, go back into Photoshop, and do Command V, as in Victor, to paste that image into my document. It doesn't have to be super high resolution as long as you have the shape. I'm going to scale this up just a little bit by hitting Command T, just so I can see it a little bit better. And I don't need the part with the other chess pieces, so I'm just going to focus on the pawn. That's a little too far. And zoom in so that I can work with it a little bit easier. So from here, we're going to go back to our layers panel. And I'm going to create a new layer, because this is where I want my path to be. And we're going to use Photoshop and use the pen tool over here to draw a path. If you've never used the pen tool before, you can click from point to point to create straight lines. Or you can click and hold to create curves. It takes a little bit of experimenting to get it just right. But once you click around and practice a little bit, you'll be able to get the hang of it. You are going to need both to be able to trace around this object. Also, if you want to make sure that the line you're creating is perfectly straight, you can click on one point, hold down Shift, and click to another point, and that will make sure that your line is completely horizontal. Or completely vertical, like that. So that is actually the line that we are going to start with. If I zoom in here and click on the top of this pawn, I am not trying to make a tracing of the entire thing. I am just making a radial slice, basically going to the radius, which is like from the outside of the pawn to the middle of the pawn down here. So I've made my first point about the center at the top. I'm gonna hold down Shift and try to go about the center at the bottom and create a line that slices this pawn in half. Then I'm going to create another line for the base that can be a straight line. I do not have to follow the curve in this picture because I want my object to lie flat on the print bed. So we are going to do that. And then from here, you can use curve tools to create this curve along the bottom of the pawn. So I'm going to click here and hold to try and match up the curves. It doesn't have to be perfect. And just go along the pawn to try and create a curved line along it. Like I said before, I'm just left clicking and holding to create the curved line until I get something to about here. And when I get to this ledge, this is not going to print perfectly the way it is if I was to just follow this line, because there is no structure supporting this overhanging sort of decoration here. So I'm going to make a straight line that is a little bit diagonal from, let's do one more point up here. From this point all the way to the outside edge. So even though it's not following the pattern, this will make things easier to print in the future. So then I'm going to just make another curve. And it's okay to take your time, especially if you're working with something that's more of like a straight circle, to just create curves along the edge of the pawn. If you screw up, you can always, like if I don't like how that curve is here, you can hold down Command and hit Z, and it will take you to your last segment. So I'm just going to keep tracing until I create a closed shape by reconnecting back up to the top of the pawn where I started. So now if I was to zoom in here, you can see that I have this blue path around the pawn. Now that I'm zooming in, I actually don't like the top of this. I'm gonna do a little bit better. Curve that just a little bit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this path looks. If I was to take the move tool and click off of it, it disappears. That's okay, because we don't have a stroke on this. You do not need a stroke, you just need the path. I just hit Command to be able to see it again, but this path is on this layer 2 right here. I'm just going to rename it to make it a little easier. Path. Gonna name this photo. Okay, and we're gonna do the same thing with this path that we did with the last technique, which is extrude this shape. So we're going to go to 3D, make sure we are on the path layer, and hit new 3D extrusion from selected path. So now, instead of using the whole layer, it is just use that one path to create a 3D object. If I go to my layers panel, we can hide this photo now because we don't need that anymore. We can hide the background, and we just have this 3D object that looks like half a chess piece. If I was to turn it around, you can see that it's added depth, but this still isn't what I want. So we're going to go back, and if I zoom out of here, I've got something that looks kind of like half a puzzle piece, which is not super helpful to me. So what I'm going to do is go back to this 3D window, and the properties have changed to the 3D workspace, and we're going to set the extrusion depth. Now this time, because we just need a radial slice, and we don't need this to be an object on its own, we're going to set this number to 0. And if I try and turn this, it becomes a flat object. So kind of like a stencil cutout again. And from here, we can go to the different views in the properties panel. And I want to go to the second one up here and go to this horizontal angle slider. If I slide it all the way back, it'll become negative numbers, which is not what we want. I'm sliding this forward all the way to the end till it gets to 360 degrees. What that's doing, sometimes it shows you, sometimes it doesn't. If I slide this back and forth, hopefully it'll show you. But it is taking that image and creating a 3D mesh and sort of moving it around in a circle. what this is doing, if I mess with the horizontal angle, is it's just creating a shape. It's lagging just a little bit with the slice I made. So I want it all the way to 360, but if I do that, I just have what looks like a cylinder, which is still not super helpful to me, and that's because the axis that this is rotating on is not the axis I want. So we're going to go back to the first panel up here and look at deformation axis. Right now it might be a little hard to see, but it is set to the center point. We just want to go to the center left, and if I change that, it is using that straight line that sort of cut our pawn in half as the axis to spin the picture around on. So now it has created a 3D object that looks like a pawn, which is super cool. And from here, we can follow the same steps that we did the last time to export our 3D model. Let me just get this back to how it started. And we're going to go to 3D up at the top, 3D print settings, make sure that the printer is set to local, make sure that the file is an STL file, and then we're going to go back to the 3D menu, hit 3D print, and here Photoshop has created our pawn model for us. So from here I can export it, name this pawn, save it to the desktop, and now I have my 3D model down here. If I open it up in Cura, this is what that model looks like. And because I was messing around with it in Photoshop, it's not exactly lying flat. I would like this model to lay on its base. So we're just going to click on the model, and click on Lay Flat. And hopefully, sometimes it can be a little wonky, but hopefully that takes the flattest part of the model and lays it on the print bed. Just in case, if you were to print this, I would print it with a raft on the bottom. But here's our 3D model that we made. So those are two techniques that you can use to use Photoshop to create simple 3D objects. This technique is nice if you, like, say, lose a game piece, or you are trying to make a custom nameplate, but these are just techniques. You can use any shape you want, really, to create 3D models. So if you have cool vector graphics or any custom designs or custom logos, you can always turn those into 3D printed objects. And hopefully this is just one way to help you get started with making your own custom 3D prints. Thanks so much for joining me with this class, and hope to see you for the next one. Bye.